Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is the very special celebration show, the pure resistance of my DMT research and the channel as a whole. You guys might remember back early last year in this journey of mine, I was contacted by a wonderful lady, a very strong lady indeed, with a wonderful family at her side as well, named Alicia. And Alicia's gone on to become a right-hand lady, if you like, to the team and our base in America, if anything. And a massive support for myself, a massive source of information, and at the same time, just become a great friend. Well, guys, tonight I have an update on Alicia's case. As some of you may have seen or heard in the cabin group on Facebook, a lot of activity occurred last year, soon after the story went out with her first encounter of when she was only 12 or 13 years old, back some 25 years ago. And it's without doubt one of the most interesting cases I've ever read or had the pleasure of speaking to anyone about. And I think you guys will agree with me, the amount of credibility and terror and constant harassment that has been involved with Alicia's life in the past 12 months has been pretty damn shocking, or soon we'll see. So, without further ado, let's get into tonight's updated encounter and a re-record of Alicia's first encounter. I hope you guys enjoy this. A big thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the support over the last God knows how many months now. It really has been an amazing journey, and I hope you guys enjoy it. The true stories as much as the fictional stories. Big thank you, of course, to all the authors who post those stories and allow me to narrate them. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's updated story. I'd like to entitle simply, It's Back. Let's get straight into that. Michigan, a place that will forever be known as the land of the Dogman. As more and more evidence and sighting reports crop up each year, last year being one of the biggest in history, so much new information and enthusiasts have begun building the knowledge and understanding towards what these cryptids' true nature and origin is. The secrets are unfolding, one thread at a time. Together, we can and will unlock those secrets, the outcome of which I do not know whether it will be what we expect nor want. I started this journey 5 odd years ago, as many of you have, probably lurking through blogs and different sources of information on the internet, and of course our libraries. It soon became a passion of mine, and after discovering Vic Cundiff's show, which took these reports and whispers online to a whole different level, unlike anyone has done before or since, it took the childhood fascination with werewolves to a world outside of Hollywood, a world where it is dark and conspiracy was rife. Most of all, a world where Mother Nature rules, and unfortunately, real people are caught up in. Many of us have grown up watching the shows like Monster Quest, etc. But one such person, they were more than just a scary show. And 2 reasons were at play. 1, she had already found out that Dogman was indeed real. 2, the show's encounters were within mere miles of her own family home. A little over a year ago now, I was contacted by just such a person, someone of who I am sure many of you have listened to her encounter or possibly even spoken to her directly. I have to say that I was underprepared for the extent of intimidation and harassment that the Dogman would persist to inflict. But through speaking with this wonderful woman, my eyes were opened to a side I knew existed, but never really had the opportunity to digest in such large amounts or potent quantities. Of course, I'm talking about my amazing friend and team member, Alicia. So many things have taken place over the course of 1 year around her remote property, for herself and her family, to her neighbours and families within a mile to a mile plus. The area is in no doubt very hot in activity in the past years, right up to recent weeks, as the warm weather brings plenty of coverage in the brush and trees bordering Alicia's home. Please bear in mind, as you will hear, The land that she lives on is her family's 500-acre farm. It is my belief, and I think Alicia would agree with me, that this particular dogman or possible pack have rested and thrived in this location for at least 25 plus years. How do we know? Well, if we take a look at the lay of the land, Alicia has told me that it was a much larger working farm when she was growing up. But as family members sadly passed, the once busy farm cut back to a small family homestead, allowing the lush dense forest to take back the land. There is a lot of water sources throughout the land, from small creeks to a large pond, although most of us Brits would call it a lake. But yes, wildlife is also in abundance, although there have been definite declines in the amount of wildlife over the years. Certain seasons had seen significant drops in deer and coyotes. Ultimately, from Alicia's first encounter 25 years ago, which we will listen to again in a minute, she has felt the presence of this creature or creatures whenever she was on or around the land and surrounding areas. There have been many times when she would grow frustrated through the lack of being able to openly speak about the trauma of her encounter as a young child, like so many accounts that we have all heard. Without being able to release her worries and confusions for such a long period, or seeing any solid evidence from other sources, you would think she might have given up or simply wrote it off as her imagination. But she will tell you all. That night with her cousin in a flimsy trailer home is so fresh in memory that if she were to recall it, she can remember the smell that leaked its way in to the trailer, her heart pounding at the sight before her, and her panicked cousin's cries that ultimately caught the dogman's attention. For that reason, she would always know without a shadow of a doubt that this was no figment of a young girl's imagination. After all, her cousin also see the dogman that night, and for that they would never see eye to eye again, less speak. Let's take a second to imagine ourselves as a 13-year-old girl faced with what most would call a nightmare in real life, and take a listen to my dear friend and fellow researcher Alicia's first dogman encounter. Hi DMT. To address my first experience, I'm not sure if I'm any good at translating thoughts to paper. I'll give you the weird ending, or basically the scariest part. My grandmother lived 2 towns over from where I live now, and I was at her house with my cousin for the week. She had a working farm, so the whole family would pitch in. Also, she lived in a trailer home. There was stuff going on for 3 days leading up to the sighting. I will elaborate when I type it all out. So, on the 3rd night, my grandmother was in her room sleeping, and my cousin and I were on the pull-out couch in the living room. We kept hearing heavy breathing, but my grandmother lived in the middle of the woods, with one dirt road leading in and out, so noises are common. So we just tried to ignore it. Then, the clicking of nails on the wood deck. I checked on my grandma's dog, and she was under the pull-out looking at me like, "Hide, you idiot." Then, there was banging noises that just erupted out of nowhere. I knew what it was, and it's not an uncommon sound. It was the crab apples falling off the tree over my grandma's trailer, but this time it was like 50 apples hitting the roof, which was odd. They usually fall here and there, only one at a time. So, I, because my cousin was a crybaby, moved to the blinds just a little, and I saw a huge furry creature. We don't have bears in our area, nor do we have anything really even close to that size here. So I just stood there, too terrified to move. It was grabbing a branch and shaking the tree. When it moved over to pick up an apple, I'm not 100% sure it was an apple, but it picked something up. I saw the thing stand up on its hind legs and take a few steps. It wasn't wobbling like a dog does when it stands on its back legs. I also noticed the legs were bent backwards, like a dog's legs. Luckily, it was dark in the living room where we were standing. There was a light from the moon. Of course, number one cliche, it was a full moon. And a huge light that was on the barn. It wasn't super bright, but it sure was bright enough to see that creature. And of course, my cousin looks and starts breathing really heavy and says we need to get Grandma. First off, I'm sure she heard the crab apples hit the roof. It was a tin roof, so it was super loud. And my grandma was 4'9" tall, maybe 90 pounds. Not sure she could protect us. With all the noise, she, my cousin, was making the thing's ears start to twitch, and it froze and turned its head so fast. I wanted to run, scream and pee my pants and vomit all at the same time. It looked right at me, right into my eyes. The eyes were a yellowish red, if that makes sense, and it started to turn its shoulders towards the way its head was facing, and started to growl a very low and guttural, almost moaning sound. I swear time pretty much stopped. I had no effing idea what I was looking at or how to react. Then a car was suddenly visible coming down the dirt road. It stopped, and quickly turned its body towards the deck railing, dropped to all fours and jumped over the railing and was gone. I have no idea how long it all lasted. It seemed like a lifetime. The car coming down was my uncle. He was just stopping by to check on us on his way home from the Ford plant he worked at. When he pulled up and parked, I leaned out the door a little to tell him to run into the house, and I just started bawling, which did make him run because he thought my grandma died or was hurt. She was 73 at the time, I believe, and I was 13, and Amy, my cousin, was 14. My grandma had made her way into the living room by now and was very calmly asking what was wrong. I remember just staring off into space, not sure if I should tell them what I saw or not. My cousin would have backed me up, but she was way more freaked out than me, mainly because that's just how she is. Any little thing was a tragedy to her. She glimpsed it for maybe 5 seconds, but she didn't have the pleasure of having it stare into her soul. I chose to just let go of every emotion I was feeling and holding back because I was hoping they would think I was hurt or sick and take me away from there. It worked, but I demanded that he pull his truck right up to the deck and help my grandma. She wasn't really slow, but in my mind, anything but running full speed was too slow. We all got into the truck and I realised the dog was still in the trailer. I demanded we take the dog, and they agreed, which made me start to think something was up. I knew all the animals were locked up in a barn, and they had this awful mean-ass bull that I honestly think would have kicked that thing's ass if it bothered the barn at all. So, we were all on our way to the hospital, and my grandma and uncle were giving each other these looks that I started to notice. I wanted to say something, but I also just wanted as many miles between me and that thing as possible. We rode the rest of the way in silence, other than that weird sound someone makes when they are trying to stop crying. That almost hiccup sound. Right before the hospital is a park with a playground equipment and sandboxes. My uncle did a quick turn into the park's parking lot. Amy and I were in these ridiculous extended cab seats that face each other, with a dog on the floor between us. He put the truck in park, and they both turned around. My grandma had streaks of dried tears on her face, which instantly made me cry again. My grandma and I were very close, and I had never seen her crying, so it hit me like a ton of bricks. I asked, what the hell is going on? I never swore in front of my grandma, not even when I was in my 20s. And my grandma said, what really happened back there? I just unloaded, and when she looked at me in the eyes, I felt like she was giving me permission to just say everything I was afraid to. When I was done, my uncle started rubbing the top of his nose between his eyes, and he yelled out, God damn it! And grandma started crying and said, I told you, I was smelling it. The 3 days prior to all of this weird things were occurring. The dog was staying right by my grandma, which wasn't normal for Mitzi. She would always be running around in the fields chasing bugs and whatnot. There was a wretched smell of urine all over it seemed, and that bull was pissed off, just on edge, would charge at anything. It was not normal. We did not go back there. We drove over to my house a few towns over. There were no woods or fields around for miles, which was a plus. My uncle that lived next to my grandma, well, when I say next to, it's a country next to, moved my grandma into his house and got the neighbours and family to come over and start digging and chopping and all of that stuff because the pasture and stuff had to be moved and everything rearranged. They put out bars on the windows and got 2 big dogs, not necessarily to attack anything, just to warn of anything around. They refused to be scared away, and after I saw my grandma cry, I started getting angry myself. I continued to go to my grandma's for 5 or 6 more years when they needed help. I was never the same, and I carried a shotgun at all times. I don't know if it would have done anything, but it made me feel better. I've been shooting guns for years. I wasn't a teenager handed a gun with no idea how to use it. I never saw it or smelled it ever again. I left for college in 1999 and I went to California and I did enjoy it. It made me feel more comfortable when I was alone, knowing I was in the middle of a big city. No woods. I worried dearly about Grandma, but she was tough and incredibly stubborn. We were never told the story of why my grandmother said, I told you, I smelled it again. I'm assuming there was another encounter. My uncle did say once it scared the kids it was over. I'm assuming they didn't know what they had seen or didn't believe it. My uncle and grandma were good, hard-working farmers. They weren't going to be scared off their land. After all that happened, I personally have never mentally been the same. Unless you have an experience like this, you will never understand how much it rattles you. Things you were told or things you believed when now in question. It was hard to deal with, but I did. About 6 months after the incident, my mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I put all of myself into praying and trying to do anything I could to help her live. So that's it. And the reason I mentioned so many times that my grandma lived in a trailer is because about 6 weeks after it happened, we were getting some of grandma's stuff and I walked out of the door and noticed the door frame. The trailer was 2 or 3 inches thick. At least it seemed that small to me. It was a 70s trailer. That is what separated that thing and me. Just 3 inches. And headway I had made to get over this was gone in an instant. Fast forward 20 plus years and it still affects my life. I don't think it follows me around and I don't think it has my scent. Nothing like that. I've never seen it again and never ever want to. But I refuse to camp in a tent and get inside the house before dark sets in. I always close curtains and blinds. I have 2 big Dogman pincers that by nature patrol our yard and they're fiercely defensive of myself and my kids. I no longer think about it every day like I used to. I sometimes hear these supposed encounters with Dogmen and the ones I think are made up are the ones where people just see it and then that's it. No after effects, no mental stress. Trust me, I don't care who you are. When you witness something like this, it completely flips your world upside down. I honestly don't know how to explain it, but nowadays life is normal with a few well-placed precautions. I wish I was wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. This isn't something I enjoyed or feel special about. It was terrifying, and I can still sometimes see it in my mind. Wow, so there we go. As I said, everyone, it really is a chilling story to hear, especially at such a young age in a remote, dark location. As you all just heard, not only did her cousin witness this creature a mere 4 feet away outside the trailer home, but as soon as Alicia's uncle and grandma took her away that night, they pulled up and stopped the truck and decided that that was the best time to try and explain that they knew something was going on, but that it was under control. Unfortunately, as you heard, they would not elaborate too much detail, and no matter how long after Alicia would pester and ask, they thought they were protecting her for the better. When I spoke to Alicia about that moment, as they all sat there in the car park, I remember how sad she was that they did not tell her more, no matter the reason. But she also understood the reasons too. She explained how it literally felt like her complete world had gone upside down and stopped in time, as her grandma warned her uncle with a worrying wobble in her voice. You see, I told you it was back. I told you I could smell it again. Those words would ring for years to come. Ultimately, this is another example of why this case is undoubtedly solid in credibility. There were multiple witnesses involved, her grandma in particular pointing out the smell was indeed back again. Collaborated with Alicia discussing with me how she'd smelt the strange odour in the days leading up to her encounter. And again, a sign that the Dogman or pack had indeed been occupying the family land long before Alicia knew anything at all, or possibly before she was even born. Alicia had described at times how there were multiple strange carcasses of livestock that they kept, many if not all killed out of spite, i.e. there was no consumption involved, just pure sadistic violence. It is Alicia's belief that her grandma and uncle had tried to make adjustments as soon as possible after her encounter, as soon as they moved the entire setup of the farm and cut back lots of the trees and brush, a move that would also be a very costly procedure. Sadly, Alicia's grandma would pass away at a happy old age in the place that she loved, and then her uncle too would pass away a few years later, leaving her the land where it would remain a quiet and perfect habitat for the Dogman to thrive. Fast forward 25 years later, and it's February 2017. I first received a comment and email from Alicia back in February of 2017. As you've all heard, we've spoken and theorised about her encounter and other paranormal activities she and I have also experienced. We would go on to become close friends and talk regularly about all sorts of things. For me, an avid Dogman enthusiast, it was incredible at first. But soon, as I got to hear of her encounter and other things, I realised the true impact of that night on Alicia's world. It was not something that most people get to hear firsthand, and so I felt very quickly a responsibility to her, and of course everyone that I speak to who contacts me for help and advice. In a nutshell, shit got real. From a very early point, and I suspect Alicia would agree, it may have been the reason for getting in touch with myself in the first place. But from a very early point on, possibly the second or third week of speaking to her, she started to tell me how she had started to notice how quiet it had gotten at night, and also during the daytime whilst out in the backyard. She would smell that god-awful smell like rot and decay mixed with sulphur and wet dog. For this reason, she was starting to worry again, and question the possibility of a dogman near her home. A point of huge magnitude to point out here is that the home that Alicia currently lives in, and has done with her family for many years now, is actually less than 2 miles from her grandma's trailer where she and her cousin would encounter the dogman that fateful night. There is nothing but forest and fields between her home and that location. If wild wolves' territories are anything to compare, then surely that distance would be nothing but a hop, skip and jump to a dogman. Also, neighbouring her home is a decent-sized cemetery graveyard, and we all know how much dogmen love to be seen hanging out with the dead. Well, things were certainly weird, but nothing that was causing her too much alarm, other than the slight what-ifs that would creep into her conscious every now and then. As we talked and I started to prepare narrating her story for the show, we were discussing the lay of the land and how it looked close to the trailer, etc. Unfortunately, Alicia would bravely suggest that her and her husband would return to her grandma's trailer and land to capture some location pictures to use in a video of her encounter. I was undoubtedly unsure and asked her if she was sure it was a good idea. Although the pics would be awesome for everyone to see, I didn't really feel comfortable with her returning, albeit poking the hornet's nest with a stick could be asking for trouble. At the same time, I was seeing a different side to Alicia already in a few short weeks that we had spoken. She was becoming more open and determined to finally conquer this black cloud of worry and ultimately overcome those tense moments in that trailer. So, in the end, we decided she would go and be extra careful, packing her 2 trusty Dogman pinchers and her husband. They set off down the short, winding Michigan country road to her grandma's home. I remember Alicia contacting me that night, concerned and a little panicked, but still trying to keep a cool head. I asked her why, what has happened. She began to explain that the second they made their way up the long dirt road to her grandma's trailer, or what remained of it, her 2 dogs were instantly acting up, yipping and what have. She too felt watched the second that she exited the vehicle. They proceeded to walk the trails and land around her grandma's trailer, taking various shots, and after I think an hour and a half or so, they were on the dirt road coming back up to the truck's direction when her 2 large dogs, that were very protective, stopped abruptly, and both practically knocked her over trying to get either side of her to protect her from some unknown presence. Her heart jumped to beats and blood ran cold, and her husband noticed the dog's reactions and Alicia's, and they began to slowly and cautiously proceed on towards the truck. So, side note there, she also had to carry on walking the direction that they'd heard the twigs and brush snapping, and the dogs had sighted or sensed something was wrong. So to say she had the balls of shiny steel would be a huge understatement, and this was just the beginning. They made it back to the truck without incident, and the dogs continued their protectiveness right up until she had to physically shove them into the truck. I was sent the pics and began speaking with her about where each shot was taken on the property in relation to the trailer. Suddenly, in one of the shots I would gauge about 80 to 100 yards in some tall brush and trees, I noticed what I thought a head that looked creepily like a German Shepherd type head, at least very canine in appearance. Now, as you all know, I've always tried to be as honest with all of you as possible, and I'm no way an expert in image analysis, but I do improve every day. But I felt that that picture didn't sit well in my gut, and Alicia confirmed that her 2 dogs were indeed growling at the direction the picture was taken in. I didn't, of course, in any way want to panic her, but also knew that she was best to know how I felt and that I agreed to what she was telling me. And I told her how proud I was of her for going back to the location and really facing her fears. Oh, but how little we realised that this would be the start of a lot. A lot of weird and downright terrifying nights, days and months. And poking the hornet's nest really wasn't a good idea that day. I woke some days later, possibly 2 days later, to a flurry of messages from Alicia, detailing that again there was that horrid smell inside the house and outside the house. Plus, she had heard strange barks or howls late in the night, and that her 2 dogs were trembling and refusing to go outside. Panic rushed through my heart as she began to tell me of the night's events. Even her son had also awoke to the strange noise coming from inside the tree line and to the back of the property in the fields. I tried my very best to console her and tried to tell her I am sure that it will be fine and hopefully it was just an injured animal. Of course, knowing deep down that she knew as well as I did that that wasn't the case. I have to again point out the responsibility that I felt and feel to Alicia. Also, how damn upsetting it was that ultimately I cannot just fix this problem. I'm a million miles away on the other side of the planet, and it has just left me exhausted and depressed at times, knowing how helpless I was being. But Alicia would assure me that, in fact, I was helping and had to stop being silly. But I digress many times when speaking to these folk who are going through close proximity to these creatures like Kirsten Sadovic over in Germany. There is a limit to what I can do, and it leaves me panicked and sometimes feeling sick with worry. If you guys could see the timeline of these events as they popped up through the emails and messenger, you too would feel the helplessness. Honestly, it's crazy. Anyway, Alicia began to feel that same heavy, overpowering feeling, building like a tidal surge waiting to break the banks of a river. She noticed a decline in the nature that would normally pass through her property, and bit by bit the pieces to the puzzle, unfortunately, were falling into place. The nights were met with loud screeches as often reported, loud tree breaks snapping loudly at the early hours before sunrise, until finally one night, the tapping began. I want you all to understand something about Alicia. She is a strong woman, raised on a farm. She's not a city slicker getting her nails done every Thursday whilst looking at goddamn Jimmy Choo's. But when she told me that there was loud thuds and scratching coming from her son's window and then hers also, it was like all memories of those encounters 25 years before swamped her all at once. First she became understandably upset, then it turned to anger. And something I did not expect, as I had only known her a brief period. But yes, instead of all-out fear, Alicia was pissed with the thing, coming back around her babies, back into her life. And I admire her for that. If he or she was going to be coming back around, it better like the taste of lead, because she was done with the mind games these creatures inflict. Mother Bear mode was a go. From this moment, no matter how scary things were going to get, Alicia was going to stand her ground. And when asked if she would move house if things would continue to get worse, she straight up told me, "Matt, I'm going nowhere. If that thing thinks it's taking my family home away from me, my child and husband, after Dogman has taken so much from me already for the best part of my life, it better have other ideas. We're going nowhere." And so Alicia began openly speaking about her encounters with anyone who would ask, something that was a huge step in her progress to normality within an abnormal situation. Again, something I'm so proud of her for doing, as I know that if anyone can help others, it's Alicia. As the months progressed, the situation was becoming more and more worrying. As some of you might know from being in a Facebook group in the cabin, activity increased to an everyday and night occurrence, although it would sometimes leave for a couple of nights, only to return again stomping, tapping and thudding on the walls of her home. Alicia messaged me one day to tell me how her grandson and her were out back playing in the sun, when her 2 dogs had spent the day so far between her and the tree line, almost trying to stop her getting too close. They suddenly sprang up and proceeded to run down near the tree line at the bottom of a sloped piece of land. She had then noticed how quiet everything had gotten, like the usual bug's crescendo, now all but mute. Many of these strange and overwhelming moments would crop up sporadically over the weeks and months in 2017, seemingly intensifying in aggression, or at least a projection of primal dominance for the area. What Dogman didn't realise is that this lady ain't going nowhere without a fight. Things got so bad at one stage in 2017, I believe it was around September. Alicia was selling an item and had a visitor to her property. Well, a few hours before the guy was due to pick up the item for sale, she noticed that the awful stench had been hanging around since first light. It was again that classic description of wet dog mix with rot and the almost septic sulphuric essence that assaulted your nose. As any homeowner would be, Alicia was concerned and a little embarrassed that the guy would notice it and assume it for her house being dirty or the sewage had busted. Well, sure enough, as like most days, she would message me to update me on the activity. Well, this time, Alicia screenshotted the messages she received from the guy after he had left the property. In the text, the guy laughed at her for being embarrassed about the stench, and when she apologised and tried to explain it wasn't her home, but something other in the air. More to the point is the guy's response. He said that yes, he had noticed it but didn't want to be rude and say something, but it had puzzled him also, as it smelt like sewage and wet dog. She was blown away, and again every grain in her body wanted nothing to do with these creatures, but all the dots were adding up to a bigger picture. Around the same time, Alicia started to hear more and more louder footfalls right outside her bedroom window and around the property in the early hours. Things became so bad, and the Dogman became so bold as to calmly strut bipedal across the open field, off a ways in broad daylight, full view of her home and neighbour Dan's property, howling and barking as it did so. At nights, the local coyotes would howl their usual noisy howls, but at a moment's notice, what could only be the Dogman would make this enormous, pain-like howl that would then silence the coyotes for the night. Even a few yelps were heard on those silent nights, as Alicia would message me very upset to tell me she could hear something being ripped to pieces outside, crying out in panic and pain among grunts and growls of excitement, until finally silenced, which of course would leave her beyond creeped out, and me extremely worried to the situation that seemed to be ever increasing. Unfortunately, again, this was just the tip of the iceberg for what was about to happen over the next 2 to 3 months. The activity was starting to get unbearable, and I was also starting to get very concerned for Alicia and her family's safety. It was becoming very apparent that this Dogman had taken a keen interest in her property, or possibly Alicia herself. One still has to question, as I do regularly, is it possible that this nightly visitor is indeed the same Dogman from all those years ago? Or possibly the offspring from the farm encounter those 25 years previous, enticed and intrigued by Alicia's visit to her grandma's trailer to gather the pictures. I guess we'll never know for sure, but the possibility still seems very plausible to myself and others that I've spoken with. As I said, things were getting to a breaking point. With ill health on top of life's problems and the presence of a large predator around her home, Alicia decided to take time away with her husband as he worked. It would get her a few days and nights away from the troubles of the Dogman. On the few days leading up to her husband and her going away, the activity was as prevalent as ever. Growling and roars were heard almost throughout the early hours and daytime. One night, shortly before Alicia was due to leave, I received a message from her in a terrible panic. "It was on the damn roof, Matt. The kitchen roof. I heard it," she told me. My heart literally dropped to my arse at this news. I was shocked and responded, "Are you sure?" To which she said absolutely. It was too heavy to have been anything else, and she could hear its heavy, wheezing breathing. It was for a short few minutes, but obviously felt like forever. I said, "Well, it's a good thing that you're getting a few days away from the property and could use the fresh air and change of scene." A few days later, Alicia and her husband set off in his truck, leaving her eldest daughter, who's in her mid-20s by the way, so no kid, and her son and grandchild. She had instructed her eldest to keep a close eye on things and to keep the doors and windows locked at night, etc. On the second night of her trip away with her husband, she received an urgent text from her daughter around 11:30 p.m, I believe, telling her that something strange is going on, and that she'd heard strange howling coming from the rear of the property, which is the field that Alicia had seen it walking casually in broad daylight. But what she wrote next made Alicia's heart drop. As her eldest daughter and an adult and mother to her own child, she had wrote that as she was getting a drink and a snack from the kitchen, she too had heard the heavy footfalls across the kitchen roof, right above her head. It scared her so bad that she returned to her bedroom, locking the door and not leaving until the sun was up the next day. Her daughter did not know whether to believe it was a Dogman, but there was no denying that those howls and the loud heavy thuds or footfalls on the roof of the property was too large to be a raccoon or other critter. Alicia and her husband returned home the following day to a relieved daughter and son, but things again returned within a few nights to a usual persistence of seemingly fascination that this Dogman had acquired towards Alicia and her home. There were no real right ways to go about living within the territory of a Dogman or Sasquatch, as I'm sure many of you who have had this type of situation, or at least an encounter. There's no written way of how to cope or advise someone to cope with the situation either. We can only guess to follow our hearts and gut instincts. Be cautious and try to remain calm and not open ourselves to an opportunity of a predator's fancy. As the warmer months had faded and the trees in the brush thinned out for the harsh Michigan winter, I and Alicia had begun speaking with multiple people and working as a team, trying to help others in the same position find the answers to the questions that they had, whether through the group on Facebook or in Alicia's case particularly, anyone local to herself. But, as I'm sure you are all aware, it's not a subject that most folk openly talk about. Either way, I saw it as something that kept Alicia focused on positives rather than dwelling on the trouble just outside her back door or bedroom window. One night in mid-December, I believe, 2017, as she sat listening to my fellow YouTube narrator Darkness Prevail's channel, she noticed a particular story that was set in Michigan. Not only was it set in Michigan, but it was literally on the very same road connecting to her own, less than a quarter of a mile away to be more exact. The damn forest that connects to Alicia's property is between the two homes. This again confirmed to her how she wasn't going crazy, and again holds considerable weight to the credibility of this Dogman case. Again, multiple witnesses, including those of no connection. Myself and Alicia contacted Darkness Prevails to see if we could get the contact details of, well, Alicia's neighbour. But after DP asked the witness, he declined, saying he wanted to try and forget about the whole thing. Although still, I'm going to chase this up here and there. Shortly after this report was submitted to Darkness Prevails, Alicia and her family were out for the day, visiting friends and grocery shopping. On returning home from being out for the day, Alicia found her back door near her laundry room severely damaged.
I'm not sure what happened, but suddenly, if you can see it, the door handle spins and the door does nothing. It spins all the way around. Hold on, let me turn the light on. Look. See, look, it doesn't do anything. It won't open. Oh, got it. But it shouldn't be doing that. Oh yeah, there we go. Yep, now it's not opening again. It's a door handle. It shouldn't be doing this. What? We don't know.
The door was of course locked, but on closer inspection and testing, she found the entire casing or barrel of the door handle and inside lock completely and utterly stripped away. As in, the handle would literally turn right around 360, showing some serious force was applied, something that I think most humans would struggle to do, and any local regular wildlife would find impossible. The bug screen to that door was shredded and torn with long slashes, all of which she captured on a cell phone and sent to me. Now, shortly after the nearby reports featured on Darkness Prevails and sign of a failed forced entry bombshell hitting, in early March of 2018, late one night around 10 PM, Alicia was startled by an uninvited guest, and in turn, a turn of events she never thought would happen again. Please do listen close as I tell you in her words what happened that evening, ultimately sealing the deal that this is indeed a dogman that is harassing, stalking and lurking close by. It was indeed back. Since I was like 13, in before dark, close all windows and pull shades, no tent camping, that kind of stuff. At the end of summer, my dog started acting overprotective. I have two big Doberman, and by design it makes me feel safer. They are protective but not overly. They usually run around and play, fight with each other, that kind of dog fun. And they refused to leave my side, to the point of chasing the tractor when I used it. I felt watched when in the field, but thought it's probably because of how my dogs were acting. End of the summer, my son comes running into my room telling me to come to his room now. My daughter, who was nosy, decided to come along as well. We all heard a horrible howling, like a walrus bellowing mixed with canine sounds. Where I live in Michigan, the biggest wild animal we have is small coyotes. I heard them my entire life. This was not a coyote. Trust me, it was way too loud and guttural. That howling went on for a while. A few days, I made my kids sleep in my room and had my gun on my nightstand, safety on. I didn't tell anyone because, well, who would I tell? I started to get angry. I didn't want to live in fear again. So I was thinking of going into the woods and in the field to look for some kind of proof. My husband said he would tackle me if necessary. He doesn't really believe. I honestly think he does, but doesn't want to admit it. Anyway, I decided I'd leave it alone. A few months go by and my neighbour started to have issues. Something or someone on his property at night was what he was saying. His floodlights, motion lights, were going off all the time. Not normal stuff for his property. I told him what I thought. He didn't call me nuts. He started to go out in the field and woods looking around. He didn't tell me much, he just said to keep my dogs away from the wooded area. One night, a few weeks ago, I just let my dogs in and walked around my kitchen island to finish dinner, when my side door bursts open and the bar stool goes clattering across the floor. Then the door slammed. I wasn't thinking anything about a DM or anything like that. I was just shocked. I ran around the edge of the island to see my neighbour laying on the floor, out of breath. He told me he was coming up to kind of hang out and talk. Now, Dan is an old military country boy type. He would walk around in the dark with a grizzly bear 10 feet from him. He doesn't scare easy. He got halfway up the hill when he heard something big hit the ground, and so he turned quick. He could see a tree branch still bobbing up and down, and then he could see the breath of something. Of course, it's an area with tons of trees, so it was shadowy. He said he was closer to our house than his own at that point, so he started backing up the hill. He got halfway up and turned and booked it. He heard the snow crunching behind him and heavy breathing mixed with grunting sounds. He never looked or stopped before bursting through my door. Then we called the police and they came, and I asked them to please not go into the woods. I didn't want them getting hurt. And of course they found nothing. By the next morning prints were everywhere, but they were all mixed up with the police and regular dog prints. My neighbour did take pics, but the area was so contaminated by other people and animals. A few days after this, I opened my door to let my dogs out and the screen on my door was torn up. Okay, that's unsettling. 2 days later, I again went to let my dogs out and the door was up against the wall with the closing arm ripped off. My dogs bark at night, but they do it so often we all kind of sleep through it. Also, they sleep in the living room at night, so we don't hear them super loud like if you're in the same room. The final thing I noticed was that my door handle to the laundry room door looked weird. I was doing a load of laundry and noticed it. It looked backwards. I grabbed it and it was totally stripped, like it was grabbed while locked and wrenched round. I provided pics and videos, and when I heard a story on Darkness Prevail's werewolf video that was less than a mile from myself, and it happened right around that time that my neighbour was being stalked and chased, I finally got some validation that I'm not crazy or lying. It's so hard to talk about with anyone because I just assume their inner dialogue is telling them I'm insane or lying for attention. Neither are the case, and I've said it before, I really truly wish I was crazy or lying, because I actually live in uncertainty of just what else is real. But I'm facing my fears now. My daughter and I are going to camp in an RV in the Manistee Forest. Anyone familiar with Dogman knows that the Manistee National Forest has so many reported encounters. Wish us luck. As I mentioned, to back this terrifying event up for those of you who are naysayers, Alicia has the police reports of the incident to hand. Again, more credibility than most encounter stories, and the timeline of events and persons involved is ever growing. There is no doubt in any of our minds that things are becoming very scary and repetitive for her and her family. Last year alone was probably one of the biggest years in Dogman sightings and encounters in Michigan. Certainly that is what some of my closest peers have agreed. It looks as if there is no sign really of it moving on, as is such the case with many other reports that I deal with. Usually, in my opinion, from what I have learnt, and the typical duration of a dogman will be in a location for a very short time, mid-term, possibly a couple of weeks to a possible 3 months. But in Alicia's case, I think it's plain to see now that where her family's land has remained untouched for decades and nature has claimed back what was once hers, there is a high possibility of a small pack living within a 30 or 50 mile radius. Thank goodness, as the freezing cold weather moved in and stripped the trees off their leaves and the coverage was lost, the dogman let up his close nighttime visits, but every now and then it would remind her with a distant howl in the crisp winter night. Recently, as the weather has warmed once more and the trees are full and there is plenty of coverage, Alicia contacted me last night just to inform me that in the daytime whilst out back, she again had smelt that same and now familiar foreboding stench coming from the woods. It instantly made her blood boil, and so she began shouting at the tree line. A short while later, Dan, her neighbour, who we just heard the encounter of, came crashing through the brush with his shotgun in hand, out of breath, and saying, "You smelt it too, didn't you? Did you hear it? It's back." All I can say, guys and girls, is that I pray that God keeps Alicia and her family safe and wily old Dan through these few months. And of course, we will keep you all up to date as best we can. Ultimately, I want Alicia to be able to settle down in life and not have to worry about this creature lurking and not have to keep checking over her shoulder and worrying about her family's safety. I'd also like to thank her for trusting me from the very, very first moment we spoke and to the very present day, and helping me understand firsthand the depth of an encounter and the effects and possible events that can transpire. I've gained more than a team member or a colleague, but a friend and a sister. Thank you, Matt. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that sort of summary on some of the events that have taken place over the last 14, 15, maybe 16 months now. I lose track, I do apologise. It's been absolutely exhausting, exciting, terrifying, all in one really. And again, I just hope that that things really do work out for Alicia and her family, and this goddamn creature moves on and finds a new home, because, you know, things have got to give. As ever, please do let us know what you think down below in the comments. Please do like and share. Please do subscribe to DMT and smash that subscribe button. Give it a good spanking to stay up to date with all DMT content. And remember, guys, above all, if you're out on a dark night with a full moon in sight and a cold, dark forest around you, keep your eyes and ears open. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.